If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former fighter, part-time writer, full-time observer, and I am joined by my co-host, the former 6-time president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, Jack Hirsch. Jack, good evening. How are you tonight?
President Frank, not 6-time. You make it seem like I had to regain the title, like I was voted out of office and had to get voted back in. 6-term.
What did I say? 6-time?
6-time.
That means you were booted out 5 times.
Well, then again, Sugar Ray Robinson was a 5-time world middleweight champion.
Right.
So, yeah, that's good company, I guess.
All right, Jack, let's kick it off. The big fight this weekend was David Benavidez versus Kyrone Davis. Benavidez is a former super middleweight champ, had the WBC title, lost it a couple times because he blew hot for cocaine. He didn't make weight. He is supposed to be the guy that is the biggest threat to Canelo. He won in a dominant fashion. I'm going to pass it to you and kick it back to you and tell me what you think, and I'll tell you what I think and what I saw in the fight.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you said, Frank, but there were 2 fighters who fought this weekend who Canelo Alvarez, his management team, was looking at very carefully. Not only Benavidez, but Jaime Munguia, who fought Gabe Rosado, because it's thought of that Canelo Alvarez's next opponent is either going to be David Benavidez or Jaime Munguia. You know, but talking about David Benavidez, I think he has a lot more upside than Jaime Munguia. And I think it would be wise for him to wait a bit longer before taking on Canelo, because I could see him being a serious threat down the line. And I'm not predicting that he would beat Canelo down the line necessarily. I'm just saying he has more upside. I think Munguia is as good as he's ever going to be. And I think Canelo beats him without much of a fuss. Not that it would be an easy fight, but it would be a decisive Canelo win. Now, you know who Benavidez reminds me of? You were talking about his problems, Frank. Buster Douglas. Now, we know Buster Douglas reached the big heights with the one historic win over Mike Tyson, but all in all, his career, I think we would agree, was somewhat of a disappointment considering his ability.
But he did beat some good fighters besides Tyson.
Right, but he could have done more. You'd agree, right? If he was totally dedicated, he could have maybe done more. Maybe conceivably have been an all-time great had he wanted it bad enough, okay? And you get the feeling with Benavidez, you know, you just don't know. Now, Kyrone Davis, is a competent pro. He hung in there. He made Benavidez work. And you got the feeling the only way Davis could win the fight if Benavidez completely tired and ran out of gas. I mean, he was just better. But while Benavidez is throwing the punches, you know, I tried to visualize Canelo standing in front of him. It would be a different story. He seemed to be a bit of an arm puncher. That was my perception. The punches weren't crisp. They didn't seem to have a lot of real snap to him. And it didn't seem like his punches in itself could really hurt Canelo. Maybe I didn't think Canelo would really would respect his power if they win there.
You mean Benavidez, right?
Benavidez. But Benavidez does throw a lot of punches, and he's quick. And I think there's upside he can improve. But Benavidez said something that I liked after the fight. While he wasn't calling out Canelo, he also called out Jamal Charlo. Now, that would be a perfect fight, Benavidez against Jamal Charlo, and let the winner go in with Canelo. And in the meantime, Canelo could take care of business against Jaime Munguia, which I think he definitely would, without that big of a problem.
Okay. I'm going to go at Benavidez first. From what I saw in the fight, and before I get to him, let me just say this. Kyron Davis's stock in a losing effort really went up. That guy showed more heart, determination, and grit. He did not go quietly. He really didn't have one tool to win the fight with against Benavidez. But I will say this, the way he moved and the way he countered him and the way he was catching with those right hands over Benavidez' jab, I'll tell you what, the kid fought a really good fight. I think his corner stopped it at the exact right time. But back to Benavidez. Here's a kid that I think when you watch him, he has all the talent in the world. He's only 24. He is clearly more formidable than the last three guys that Canelo fought, and Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, and Caleb Plant. However, I think he fights with too much confidence. He has so much confidence in his power. He walks in a straight line, and I think those are the type of guys that Canelo has a field day with. The guys that try to blast Canelo out and try to go through him don't do good. It's the boxers that give him movement and different angles, and they make him pick up his feet and move. I think Benavidez looked a little soft physically. You could tell he was rusty, but after about the second round, Jack, he really picked it up and took it to him. And I'll tell you what, inside, he is very fast. He can put his punches together really good. You know, Benavidez feasts on guys at that level. I think Davis is a second-tier guy. I think he had the career night of his life, and he fought a really good fight. But Benavidez was just too big, too strong, too good, put his punches together too good. And he just, you know, again, boxing, people don't realize how much it takes the strength to box.
Well, he kept
Benavidez
working. Benavidez kept working all fight. That's what kind of impressed me. I know Stephen Breadman Williams, Kyron Davis's trainer, was trying to motivate his fighter by saying he's gassed, meaning Benavidez was really getting tired. And
yeah, well, he didn't mean that. He was trying to give him an extra, right.
Right. But Benavidez kept throwing punches, didn't fade out. But then again, Canelo would be a different proposition when a guy's hitting back, and he wouldn't just be able to stand in front of Canelo and keep firing away without paying a price. I think if they made the fight now, Canelo would win. If you make it down the line, let's wait and see how much Benavidez can improve. Maybe Canelo slips just a little. I think it would serve Benavidez better. Just wait on this fight about a year, you know?
But Jack, he may not have that opportunity because they're going to look at Cinco de Mayo, and that's going to be a huge fight. And how does he turn down that money?
Cinco de Mayo, a fellow Mexican, an all-Mexican battle. And Munguia is absolutely
Munguia would be moving up 2 weight classes. And let me get to Munguia.
He's a middleweight, 1 weight class. He's a middleweight.
Okay, but he started as a junior middleweight, and that's what I was going to get to. He is there to be hit. I don't think he has
a welterweight.
I don't think Munguia has the power at middleweight as he did at junior middleweight. He's not, you know, he hit Rosado with a lot of shots. Never really had him in trouble from what I saw. I don't think he's a good matchup for Benavidez. I'm sorry, for Canelo. And honestly, Jack, I never really thought that was an audition for Munguia to fight Canelo. I thought he was more trying to position himself to fight Golovkin, who fights at the end of the month. Jack, turn your sound on.
Yeah, Munguia, I don't see where he goes from here. I think he has to take the money, the few $1 million at least he gets to fight Canelo, because otherwise he's got to fight one of the, you know, maybe Jamal Charlo, and that's not the best fight for him. That's a risky fight. There's a good chance he could lose to Jamal Charlo.
Who are you talking about, Jack? Because your sound was out.
Munguia.
I would pick Charlo to beat Munguia, but let me address something.
Munguia, if he may as well go for the gusto, fight Canelo, get the giant payday. Look, Caleb Plant got $10 million. Munguia won't have a belt to bring to the table the way Plant did. But on Cinco de Mayo, an all-Mexican thing, it's good for $7-8 million as payday. He's not, and against Charlo, what's it going to be? Maybe $2 million. You know, you take the money. No disgrace to lose to Canelo. If you give him a great fight, your stock goes up even if you lose.
Jack, I don't think Munguia is in the sweepstakes to fight Canelo. I really don't, because Canelo wants to clean out the super middleweight division. And the only guy out there that thinks, or the only fighter out there that has the credibility to challenge Canelo at 168 is Benavidez. And I think that's the fight he's probably going to take.
Canelo is going to get the best fights anywhere from 160 to 175. I don't think titles are important. I think the Golovkin third fight's going to take place if Golovkin beats Ryan Murad on December 29th in Japan. And I think that fight's going to probably take place at catch weight. You know, Golovkin's a middleweight, but Canelo's going to tell him, you have to maybe move up in weight. And maybe won't even be a catch weight. Maybe Golovkin's going to want to fight so bad and be so desperate for the fight, and the money's going to be so great. He's going to meet Canelo 168. And this isn't the same Golovkin. I would pick Canelo to stop Golovkin as you mentioned last week.
It's probably I believe it's between Benavidez and Canelo, Benavidez and Golovkin. Let me address something that Lee Grove said. He said the main threat Benavidez presents is his ability to start fast. Canelo is a notorious slow starter, and Benavidez has enough power to earn Canelo's respect. He's a most dangerous guy. I agree with a lot of that, Lee, but I think they're both slow starters, and I think that helps Canelo get a read on him, try to push him back, work his body. And again, I don't know what kind of a chin that Benavidez has, but I know Canelo has a great chin, and Benavidez does not pressure like Golovkin. And I'm not even sure he throws as many punches. He throws his punches more in spurts, and that's where he's really good. He can really put them together, and hard punches from both sides on the inside. He's very quick. But see what we're talking about? These are good fights. These are fights that people want to see. I want to see Canelo against Benavidez. Look, I don't think that Golovkin has a chance to beat him in a third fight, but I'm interested.
Like you say, you want to see good fights. One of the fighters we debated last week that's close to Canelo's weight, Demetrius Andrade. Okay, his promoter, Eddie Hearn, okay, said today that, I don't know whether you saw it, that of all the fighters he's ever promoted, he's had the most difficult time getting fights for Demetrius Andrade because he's never had a case where absolutely no one wants to fight Andrade. He just can't get opponents because no one wants to step up at all. This weekend, we're going to talk in a moment about the big fight, Terrence Crawford against Sean Porter. But hidden in the news, basically, is Demetrius Andrade fighting Jason Quigley the night before, this Friday night. Okay? It should be an easy win for Andrade. He's like 2-3 levels above Quigley. I don't consider Quigley even a threat in this fight.
Andrade's a 20-1 favorite.
Right. I think it's more of a showcase fight for Andrade. But I will say this to support your view as far as Andrade goes. If you want to fight Canelo so badly, step up to his division to 168. Andrade's 160. But the problem is no one answers the call to fight Andrade because it's high risk, low reward right now.
I'll give you the perfect fight. I'll give you the perfect fight in the middleweight division. Okay? And these two guys have so much in common. It's not funny. They fight different styles, but what they have in common are undefeated records and questionable resumes. And that is Jamal Charlo and Andrade should fight. And one of them should get rid of the other one.
Andrade has thrown out continuous challenges Charlo's way. Charlo has never said he wanted to fight Andrade and never said it's serious.
And I think, Jack, and the reason is that he doesn't feel that there's much to gain by beating Andrade.
Well, he wouldn't beat Andrade, I don't think. But he's got to fight someone. But what's Jamal Charlo, what's he doing? There's a guy who by now...
He's waiting for Golovkin to get old.
But listen, one or two things should happen with Jamal Charlo. Not to be confused with his younger brother, Jamel, who's a junior middleweight. Jamal is the middleweight. He's the one division above. But Jamal Charlo, by now, one of these two things should have happened. He should have either lost the fight by now or he should have been a star by now. And he's neither, meaning there's not the real movement in his career. And I understand the pandemic held back a number of careers, but what's going on with Jamal Charlo? I mean, let's see.
I agree, Jack. I agree with that, but I get the feeling from both Andrade and Charlo that they're a little hesitant about who they fight because they want to keep that undefeated record and they want to get that lottery payday. I think that applies to both of them, and I think that Charlo is hoping to get either Golovkin or Canelo on the downside. Now, look, we already know that Golovkin's on the downside. Canelo, we may start to see that, but I don't think for another year or so. I still think Canelo may have his best days ahead of him.
Frank, you mentioned the odds with the Andrade fight 20-1. If you offered me 20-1 odds to take Quigley, no, I would give 20-1 sooner than take it, because if he fights Quigley 100 times, he beats him 100 times. But
yeah, Quigley's a stand-up straight guy that has no.
Let me ask you now. Let me ask you a viewpoint. I'm picking Terence Crawford to stop Sean Porter, win sensationally, but the odds are 7-1. If you gave me a choice, I'd have to give 7-1 odds, and I have Crawford, or take 7-1 odds, and I have Porter. I'd actually take the 7-1 odds, because you have to give Porter a chance in this fight. What do you think?
All right, Jack, I believe that this is the toughest opponent that Terence Crawford has shared the ring with. And I think the style of Porter is a tougher matchup for Crawford than any other welterweight in the world, with the possible exception of maybe Jaron Ennis, but that's down the road. But Porter, look, this is what we know. Both guys are really strong. One guy has a football background. One guy wrestles. They're both strong guys. Their styles are completely different. But this is what we know about Porter. He has a great chin. He's always in shape. He can hit pretty good. He's fearless. And he's also smart enough to know that he can't try to be cute with Crawford and pick his spots and try the wait and react game. He has one chance. He has to go at him like a wounded lion, because that is the one thing that can upset a boxer as diverse as Crawford. Some guys have tried to do that, and they got hurt coming in doing that against Crawford. Porter has the chin, and I believe he believes he has the chin and the strength and the toughness to be aggressive. So, based on your bet, I would probably go that way too, for the fact I think Porter knows he can't win a decision, and he has to win by stoppage.
Well, let me tell you, this is a comparison fight for Crawford, because winning in itself is not enough. If Crawford wins a close decision, in a way, he's a loser in this fight, because Crawford has to distinguish himself from the rest of Porter's elite opponents. Porter has fought Keith Thurman. He's fought Errol Spence. He's fought Danny Garcia. He's fought Ugas. He's fought Kell Brook. And the same pattern is they've all been very close fights.
Yes.
Distance, a couple of wins, a couple of loses, but they're all close fights. And if Crawford should win a close decision over Porter, much in the manner, let's say, that Keith Thurman and Errol Spence did, he doesn't distinguish himself from the rest as a pound-for-pound claimant. Now, if he stops Porter, it's in any way, shape, or form before the distance, he distinguishes himself, especially if it's a sensational fight. He gets him out of it. And imagine it's a totally dominant fight. Basically,
Jack, I agree with that. Even Crawford said, he goes, this is a win-win fight for Porter. If he loses and he makes a good showing, it's a win. If I win and it's close, it's almost like a loss. He goes, I have everything to lose, and it could be win big for him. And I think that's what we're going to see with Porter, Jack. One of two things are going to happen. I agree that Porter has to, as Senator Scott said, he has to throw the sink at Crawford. That's his best chance. One of two things are going to happen. That's going to befuddle Crawford, and it's going to throw him off his game, and he's not going to look good, or Crawford is going to catch him coming in, and he's going to hurt him, and he's going to beat him more convincingly than anybody else. And let's be honest, if Crawford thrashes Porter, I don't care what anybody says, Crawford would be my number one pound-for-pound guy, because to thrash Porter is something that we've never seen. I don't want to hear these old and that he has 3 losses. That Spence fight was close. You know, the knockdown might have been the difference. And Crawford, I also believe he knows this is his legacy fight, or the first of many to come. And I think there's a chance that we just might see the best Crawford, because I don't think he's ever been more motivated, and he has so much to win. All he talks about is how, like, every time I fight and I beat somebody, they always talk about how they make excuses. He goes, Kell Brook was supposed to be my toughest fight. After the fight, they say, well, he wasn't really that good. So he's cognizant of that. So I think we're going to see the best Crawford. But I really do believe that Porter is the toughest matchup, tougher than Spence, tougher than Garcia, tougher than Thurman. I think he is going to beat the guy who is the most equipped to beat him, because even though he's not as good skill-wise,
Frank, prediction time on that fight. Let's get right to it. I like Crawford in 9 rounds to stop Porter. Sensational fight. I think they're going to start slower than you think. It's going to be a little tactical in the beginning. I think Crawford's a slow starter. It's going to heat up at the 3rd, 4th round, and they're going to be going at it. Great fight, but you know, Crawford's eventually going to overwhelm him and get him out of there. 9 rounds, I'm calling it for Crawford. What about you?
Jack, it's too far out for me to give a round. I'm just going to say this. I think it's going to be Crawford, and I think he will definitely separate himself. And at the end of the fight, whether it goes to distance or if he stops him, it's obvious. But even if it goes to distance, it'll be the most one-sided loss of Porter's career. But I don't want to pick the result as far as stoppage or decision. I want to think about it some more. I want to hear them talk. We're 6 days out. So, but I don't see any chance.
Show's Monday. The fight will be done. The viewers want a prediction. I'm putting you out on the limb, Frank.
I'm going to give you Porter. I'm sorry. I'm going to give you Crawford, but you're not going to box me into a corner to say decision or knockout when I'm really not sure. I can see a case both ways.
Okay, but let's pretend Crawford does win and wins big. What's next? His contract with Top Rank is up. He really would be a promotional free agent, but
he's going to leave Top Rank. I think he's going to sign with PBC. That's where all the fights are, and I think he's going to do that.
Will Errol Spence's with PBC? Does he necessarily fight Crawford next? I'm not sure. Do they give Ugas for Crawford then? Would they give Keith Thurman for him? And there's the X Factor welterweight who might, in a year from now, be better than them all, obviously, Duran Ennis. And Duran Ennis, you're going to see, is going to be given the Demetrius Andrade treatment. No one's going to want to fight Duran Ennis, the big guys, because the risk is just too much.
Absolutely.
And the reward isn't enough at this stage. Not until Ennis establishes himself as a star. Listen, Frank, we know anyone will fight anyone if the reward is high enough. That's why everyone wants to fight Canelo. Not because they think Canelo is unbeatable, because they know if they lose, they still win, because they make the type of money they can't get anywhere else. Everyone loves Canelo. Everyone wants a piece of Canelo. It's that way with Mayweather too. They wanted to fight Floyd because it was the money. You know, that's how it is with big stars.
I know this much, and this is going to shock some people, but I really believe if Crawford stomps Porter, he should pull a Mayweather, and he should fight Jaron Ennis next before he gets really good, because I think that kid is a real problem for everybody out there. And I'll tell you what, I am so high on this kid. You know, I don't know if Porter beats him. I'm sorry. I don't know if Crawford beats Ennis a year out from now. That kid is getting bigger and stronger. He's mean. He's a harder puncher than Crawford. You know, he's almost as gifted from both angles and both sides. If I were Crawford, I would say either fight Ennis next or don't go near him.
I wouldn't do that, Frank. I'll tell you what. One, I'm not that sure Crawford beats Ennis even now. That's how good Ennis is. I can't say with absolute confidence that Crawford would beat Ennis right now. He would be favored, obviously, because Ennis doesn't have the resume. And we just talked about risk reward. It wouldn't be as big a fight for the public yet. Ennis needs that name victory, and
he has to get a belt. He has to go through one of the champions. Yes.
Yeah, if he could get a belt, let's say the PBC, allowed Ugas to fight Ennis, and Ennis wins that fight, in big and decisive fashion, which I think he would. Then he's got a belt. His name takes off. But sometimes these hot shots, their career stagnates, like Devin Haney, the lightweight. A couple of years ago, I thought Devin Haney was going to be, one of the big name fighters in the sport. I thought he was kind of like a generational fighter. And it hasn't taken off the last couple of years. I mean, he's just another name in the pack calling guys out. And it's been a big disappointment. And you have a number of these guys, they let their prime years go by, or they waste a few years in their career.
Because they don't want to fight each other, and they want to stay undefeated to get that payday. Everybody knows that. That's the problem. That's why we don't see the best fights. Look at Gabe Rosado. Look at the guys he's fought. He's fought everybody, but he doesn't have a pristine record. And, sometimes he gets overlooked. The guy never gives a bad fight. Nobody beats him easy. The kid is just an old throwback.
Fighters, Frank, and no due respect to Gabe Rosado.
He loses to the elite guys, Jack. But you know what? Without guys like him, elite guys don't mean anything.
Gabe Rosado is not an elite fighter. Never was going to be an elite fight. I'm talking about the Devin Haneys, the Ryan Garcias, the Tank Davises.
Now he's the best of that lot. Davis is the most gifted of those guys. He is fast.
But that's another discussion. But the point is, even if Davis is, okay, you want to see some separation. You want to see them fight one another. Like we had a good heavyweight matchup early in the year, and I was surprised with two British heavyweights, one beaten, Joe Joyce, Daniel Dubois. They were matched against one another, and they were like top 10 contenders, lower half. And I was astonished. Two fighters still on the way up.
That's old school. Yeah,
that was old school. I had so much respect for that.
But that's the problem with boxing. That's the problem with boxing today. Only the elite guys fight other elite guys once or twice a year, and that's what hurts the sport. That's why it's getting its ass kicked by MMA, because all the good guys in MMA have to fight each other. In boxing, they don't. And let me answer Central Scott. Could Ennis be today's Thomas Hearns? He's not the puncher that Hearns is, but he's probably a little bit more well-rounded as far as his game goes. I mean, I don't want to put that pressure on him and say he's the next Hearns.
I don't think you could say that, Frank, not at this time. Thomas Hearns was a great boxer. No one outboxed Thomas Hearns ever. Okay? You're
right about that. You're right. And we haven't seen, and you know what, Jack, at the same age, I don't think Ennis is far off the track. In fact, if you look at everybody Hearns fought until Cuevas, I think Ennis would beat all those guys. He is a special fighter. He reminds me of somebody. He has a little Roy Jones in him, a lot of Terrence Crawford, and he's mean like Sugar Ray Leonard. We're going to be hearing about him and talking about him for a long time. And think about it.
I'm high on that.
You don't think he's, we can't talk to him about Hearns, but Jack, think about this. You said that you would pick Ennis to beat Crawford right now.
I know.
I'm not sure how many welterweights I think beat Crawford overall.
Frank, I said I wouldn't be surprised if he beat him right now. He might be able to beat him right now. That's a difference between saying.
No, you said you think he could. You said I think he could.
I didn't. Wait. Maybe I said I think he could. I didn't say I think he would. Okay, I think he could. I think it would be a highly competitive fight. Ennis would be in with a real good shot. Okay, let me go a step further. That's how high I think of him as talent.
Okay, Lee Rose says to me, Ennis is more like a younger and more explosive Crawford. I agree with that, Lee, but here's the difference. Crawford came up from lightweight. Ennis is starting as a welterweight. So he's definitely the stronger guy. But I agree with you. When it comes to gifts and diversity, I think Ennis is right there. Jack, I don't know what more you need to see from Ennis other than somebody hitting him really hard to see if he takes a punch. And I know for a fact the guys that work with him in the gym all say the kid's got a cast iron chin.
Okay, yeah, well, listen, I'm hoping Ennis gets the big fights. I'm sure he will. I mean, the stoppage over Delorme, I mean, he looked impressive. Delorme actually, and I kind of brushed this off, appealed the verdict and hoping.
Right, said he got hit behind the head.
No contest. It made no difference. But
I think the way he turned his head is why that shot caught him. If I was managing him, I would do the same thing. But I'll tell you what.
Yeah. And
I bet he can take a rematch with him.
Speaking about when fighters fought fighters, our anniversary fight on November 17th, 1972, I had the privilege of being at Madison Square Garden. Actually, 5 months before, I was at the Garden to see Roberto Duran win the world lightweight title off Ken Buchanan. And a star was born that night in Duran. Okay, maybe it was born the fight before when he knocked out Benny Hurtis in a round at the Garden. But the Duran legend really took off that night. And then he fights 5 months later against Esteban DeJesus in a non-title match at Madison Square Garden. This picture isn't from the Garden. That's from
the third fight.
Third fight, right. Good one, Frank. And so I'm at the Garden, and I remember talking to Johnny Baz, seeing him before the fight, and he was saying, the eccentric matchmaker, Johnny Baz, saying, well, if DeJesus can get, not get blown out immediately, he has a chance of winning it. Well, not only did he not get blown out immediately, in the first round, he knocked Duran down heavily, and that set the tone. It was a very competitive fight. New York scored fights on a rounds basis at that time. I scored it 6-4 for DeJesus, and it was a unanimous decision for DeJesus. Now, that history actually repeated itself later on when Duran beat Sugar Ray Leonard, and then something like a few months later, okay, even a little sooner, he's not in shape for the rematch, and Duran was not in great shape for the DeJesus non-title match. Because he's been celebrating winning the title. He'd fight DeJesus twice more, and he'd stop DeJesus both times. But actually, DeJesus knocked down Duran again in the first round of the second fight. And then Duran started to rally from the third round. And then in the rubber match, DeJesus wasn't quite the same fighter. Maybe
Duran was peaking.
But Duran was at his best. But listen, it was enough of a rivalry that if they fought 25 times, DeJesus could win 3 times out of 25, which says a lot. It sounds lopsided, but against the great Duran, it says a lot for the type of
Duran. Jack Duran. That was 5 months after he won the title from Buchanan. It was an over the weight fight. He was 5 pounds heavier. They were both 138. DeJesus at the time was, I think, the 3rd ranked lightweight, and that left hook he dropped Duran with was a beautiful shot a minute into the fight. But you know what? Duran was more embarrassed from that shot. There's a couple clips. I went back and watched that fight today where DeJesus actually stunned and shook Duran with some right hands over his low left in the 4th round. It stood out. And there were a couple other times where he shook Duran. It was like that was DeJesus's night. He was first in all the exchanges, and he finished up last. He really, 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 really boxed beautiful that night. He was a boxer puncher. Duran's more of a swarmer, but he couldn't get a read on DeJesus. Like again, he wasn't in shape, and Duran we still didn't know at that time that he was Duran, but he did get a lot better. And the guy that really, 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 really suffers is DeJesus. Because think about this: if there's no Duran, DeJesus is probably the best lightweight of the 70s.
He would have fought Ken Buchanan.
He never fought Buchanan.
No, he never did. But Buchanan never got the rematch with Duran.
And that's the only thing I hold against Duran, Jack.
Buchanan,
Duran.
yeah.
Duran is an all-time great. He's in my top 10 all-time pound-for-pound fighters, okay? But the one thing I hold against Duran is he never gave Buchanan a rematch. And to this day, all these years later, I have never heard it explained cogently why. Now, I know you're going to jump up and you're going to say, well, look, Duran was the better fighter and he would have beat him in a rematch. Jack, I agree with that. But sometimes a guy will come out of nowhere that you like Monzon with Benavidez. Duran had a little bit of juice going in, but nobody knew, and Buchanan had no way of knowing who he was fighting that night. And I think in a rematch, I think Buchanan would have given him a better fight. Do I think he would have defeated him? No, but I think he would have been in the fight a lot more. And I hold it against Duran to this day for never giving him a rematch. And just for the record, Buchanan was in the top 3 for the next 3 years until he lost to Suzuki in a title fight. But Duran never gave him a rematch. I don't think he was afraid of him. I don't think he felt he couldn't beat him, but they never fought again.
Carlos Alida, Duran's manager, made those decisions, and obviously he considered Buchanan to be a threat, okay, in a rematch. But, Gil Clancy was Buchanan's chief cornerman the night he lost to Duran. And I asked Gil later on, who does he think would have won a rematch? And he said he thinks Duran would have beaten Buchanan in a rematch. That was his opinion.
Okay? Jack, I agree with that. I think it would have been, but it would have been more competitive.
Let me tell you an interesting thing, too, about Duran's career, which you're no doubt aware of. He'd always have crowd support in the United States. When he fought Davey Moore in 1983 at the Garden, Davey Moore was a New Yorker. He was born here, lived here his whole life. And it was an absolute disgrace the way the Garden crowd was all for Duran, a foreigner from Panama, over their local guy. But when he fought DeJesus in 1972 at the Garden, the crowd was more for DeJesus than Duran because you had a large Puerto Rican contingent on hand. And the Garden wasn't sold out for that fight either, okay? And it was a big night of glory for DeJesus.
It's a shame that some guys are really cursed by their birth certificates, Jack. DeJesus could have been the man, perhaps. It would have been between DeJesus and Buchanan for the best lightweight of the 70s. And then if you look at it, I feel the same way about another Gil Clancy guy, Rodrigo Valdez. If it wasn't for Carlos Monzon, he probably is the best middleweight of the 70s. But he had to come along the same time as Monzon, and he was overshadowed by him. And then last but not least, a guy we like. Look, if Jerry Quarry is born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, he wins a piece of the title. He just came along at the wrong time.
Yeah, and what makes that all interesting, those guys, Rodrigo Valdez isn't in the International Boxing Hall of Fame, is not. Esteban DeJesus is not. Some people feel they belong in there. Jerry Quarry, a lot of big wins, but had he gotten a version of some title? But you want to know something? At the time Quarry fought during the 1960s, holding a version of the title really didn't mean that much. Like when Ernie Terrell held the WBA heavyweight title, everyone knew Ali was a champion going into the fight. It wasn't seriously considered a unification fight. And but yeah, you mentioned that, good points with that. And when you talk about fighters fighting a lot, big fights, we were talking before, guys, we just like to see them pair off against one another. We were talking about Devon Haney, Tank Davis. We'd love to see them fight one another. Ryan Garcia, mix match them, whatever. But Jake LaMotta, okay, he's our fighter spotlight this week. And talk about legendary names. And the movie Raging Bull, let's be honest about it, as charismatic as LaMotta was, that movie took him to another level. And I
exposed a group of fans to him that didn't know who he was.
Right. And I witnessed that late in life, when LaMotta's life, at a banquet in Canastota and Hall of Fame weekend. They're calling the fighters in one by one. And of course, you call the biggest names in last. But by that time, just about all the big names had sat down. And they're looking there, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, and then they call LaMotta, and all these all-time great fighters on the edge of their seats, like looking, trying to catch a glimpse of LaMotta. Like he was kind of like the legend of legends. But let me tell you, Frank, we talk about old-timers, how they would fare today, or fare in any era. I don't care who the middleweight champion was. It could have been anyone in history. LaMotta at his best would have given them pure hell. What do you think?
Jack, I can't disagree with that. Anybody that can fight Sugar Ray Robinson 6 times and do pretty good, even though in 5 of those fights he was like 10 to 15 pounds heavier. LaMotta, a classic swarmer, pressure guy, not the punching bag that some people think he was. You know, his defense was a lot better than he got credit for. Problem with Jake was he wasn't the hardest trainer. He wasn't always in shape. I think in his entire career, even though he fought mostly as a middleweight until the very end when he fought light heavyweight, I think LaMotta only made 160 for his title fights and maybe a couple other fights. So he always fought the weight. But there's a guy, think about this, fights Robinson 5 times between 42 and 45. He was only stopped 4 times after fighting what? He was 83, 19, and 4. He was only stopped 4 times. LaMotta was stopped by Robinson, the fix against Billy Fox, Danny Nardico at light heavyweight, and then in his last fight, he got stopped. What's that?
Yeah, late in his career when he was done. You know what the problem was? I disagree with you on one thing you said, LaMotta not being in shape. I think LaMotta was in shape. There's no evidence he didn't train hard. I think making weight was a problem for LaMotta. Keep this in mind, Frank. There was no super middleweight division. So LaMotta either had to make 160 or he had to go up to 175. And that's what I hate about the mentality of boxing. Fighters try to get down as low as they can in weight and fight in that division rather than fight at a more natural weight. But
he was such a big eater. I agree with you, but he wasn't the hardest. You know, he didn't live in the gym, though, Jack, like a lot of other greats did. So I think that was part of his issue, too. And I agree here with what Lee's saying. If you remember, for the first 8 rounds of his title losing effort against Robinson, that fight was even, and then he slowed down a little bit. But then if you ask Robinson said that was their plan, to get him in the later rounds. They knew he'd tire. And I'll tell you what, that was a heck of a fight. But you know what I hate about the movie, The Raging Bull, Jack? If you remember, at the end of the Robinson fight on St. Valentine's Day, when the fight's over and Robinson's walking back to his corner, you see LaMotta go, hey, Ray, couldn't put me down. When you watch the fight itself, LaMotta's handlers literally had to guide him back to his corner. He didn't say a word to anybody, and he sat on his stool for 5 or 10 minutes after the fight. So anybody that thinks that's real, that was Hollywood. He didn't say that, but obviously he had a lot of respect for Robinson. And you know what? I think Robinson is either the first or second greatest middleweight of all time. I think LaMotta is in the top 10.
Well, you know, Lee Groves mentioned about LaMotta outboxing Robinson the first 8 rounds. I'm not sure he outboxed him.
He didn't outbox him, but it was close. I had it 4-4.
Right, but if you notice one thing that LaMotta was effective at, he kept connecting with jabs. You wouldn't think a guy like that. He had a lot of success landing a jab on Sugar Ray Robinson. And I remember Emmanuel Stewart told me a story. I was good friends with Emmanuel about what George Gainford, Sugar Ray Robinson's trainer, told Emmanuel Stewart. And that Robinson, he had trouble with guys with a really good jab. Because I once wrote a story, Mythical Fights, Fantasy Fights, and I had Tommy Hearns edging Robinson in an upset, at welterweight. It was all fantasy stuff. But the point is, I said to Emmanuel, but I think Hearns would have been in with a legitimate chance because of his style. And Emmanuel Stewart said, I agree with you. Robinson was better than my guy, but I think my guy Tommy Hearns could have beaten him, even though Robinson was better, only because of the style. Long, lanky, the jab would have given Robinson certain fits. But that'll get people mad, me saying something like that. But,
Jack,
who knows?
Emmanuel is right, but think about this. Every fighter that you mention, or I could mention, that has a great jab, you know what their liability is? Most guys don't try to jab them, and they don't see many jabs. And when that happens, they have trouble with that. I love Tommy Hearns. I have him number 4 all-time welterweight. Obviously, I have Nut Robinson number 1. I think early in the fight, like with the Leonard fight, I think Hearns would have been leading. But eventually, Robinson would have realized he has to go inside. No fighter in the history of boxing puts punches together as good as Robinson. And I think at 47, he would beat Hearns, but it would be after the 10th round.
But you make a great point, and you made me think of the Randall Turpin rematch when Robinson had urgency in his career more than any other time. He got cut. Maybe the cut was a complete fluke. And in those days, a guy could butt you with the head, and it would count the same as a punch. It wouldn't matter whether he butted you. You could lose your title that way. But Robinson was trying to regain the title because he had been partying in England on the world tour, and somehow he dropped it.
When he lost the title, yes.
I lost it to Turpin. And he knew he had to either knock Turpin out that round, or they probably were going to stop it. He went all out and got Turpin out of there. With that type
Robinson, Jack Robinson.
Well, let's get back.
He's one of the best finishers we've ever had in boxing. He's probably in the top 3. He turned that switch on, and he really, really, really ruined Turpin at the end of that fight.
Lamotta's probably ticked at us if he's looking down, because he's the fighter spotlight, and we're talking about Sugar Ray Robinson. But Lamotta's legacy is tied into Robinson, much the way Ali and Frazier's are to one another.
Jack, what we didn't talk about? The guy he won the title from. How about Lamotta beating Marcel Cerdan, and then when they were going to have the rematch, Cerdan gets killed in a plane crash. What happens if that doesn't happen? Because Cerdan was hurt when he fought Lamotta when he lost the title. I'm not sure Lamotta beat Cerdan in the rematch.
My guess is, I never thought who would have won that match before, but off the top of my head, I would guess that Cerdan would win. And let me tell you what I'm basing it on, Frank. I don't know whether you agree with me. Lamotta's one title defense after winning the title, he fought another Frenchman, Laurent Dethol, and he was losing in the 15th round, and he rallied and stopped his opponent with
40 seconds left in the 15th round.
In the fight, all the way at the end of the 15th round, he rallied and got the stoppage. Otherwise, he would have lost the title. And Dethol wasn't as good a fight as Marcel Cerdan. So
that's a good point, Jack. I'm not sure who I think wins that fight, but I would have liked to have seen it because they're both two of the greats.
I meant to mention this. Thanks a lot, Lee, for mentioning one fantasy fight that never took place. Lee Groves, right, was Lamotta and his friend Rocky Graziano. Thoughts? No contest, Lee. I mean, let me take that back. Graziano would fire his hardest punches at Lamotta. Lamotta would weather them and get Graziano out of there in 5-6 rounds or thereabouts. It would be a war. It would be a Hagler-Hearns type slugfest. But Lamotta,
Jake is the bigger guy with the better chin, and once Rocky got his load, he would walk through him.
Well, how can Rocky win the fight outside nailing Lamotta?
That's it. Got to hit him with the right hand and stop him, and I don't see that happening. He might blunt him a little bit. He might shake him, but it's not enough to turn the fight in his favor. They did. That was a fight that was talked about, but I think Rocky knew he wasn't going to beat Jake. But I'll tell you what, who would you take over Jake of the recent middleweights?
I would have loved recent middleweights. Wow. I'm going to tell you, I can't say.
Let's go back 50 years. Jake was the last champ. He was champ in 51. Let's say go back from 1960 on.
I don't think Lamotta beats Hagler, for example, okay? Because Hagler was tough like LaMotta's tough. People don't realize how physically tough Hagler was, and he had a LaMotta-type chin. And he would throw more punches, a little more. He'd be a little busier, a little more versatile. So I'd have to go with Hagler over the distance, of course. Carlos Monzon, he a physically tough guy, but he boxed very well on the outside. He would keep away from Hagler. He would pile up, LaMotta. He would pile up points. LaMotta would rough Monzon up at times, but I think Monzon outpoints him too. You talk about Canelo Alvarez. Wow. I got to feel at middleweight, Jake would hold a little bit of an edge because they would meet head on. And LaMotta, I don't think, fades out the way Canelo's other opponents do, the way Canelo breaks down his other opponents.
So we basically agree.
I think LaMotta, but I think it goes the distance because Canelo has a tremendous chin and he's a tough guy physically as well. How about, all right, Jack, I'll tell you what. I agree with you. I think that both Hagler and Monzon would outbox. Lee, I was going to get to that too. I think Hagler and Monzon both outbox LaMotta. I'm trying to think. I think his style gives Monzon more trouble, but I think, like you said, Carlos keeps it outside, beats him with the jab, ties him up when he gets in close, and he wins a dull fight. I think with Hagler and LaMotta, there'd be some good exchanges, and Jake would do pretty good. But Hagler would just outbox him. He had the better jab. He's more versatile. And like you said, Jake's not going to knock him out. Now, you're going to talk about Hopkins against LaMotta. You know what, Lee? I'm going to tell you something I don't know if you ever heard before. I ran into LaMotta at a press conference it was a fight in Atlantic City. It was a couple months before Trinidad fought Hopkins. And somebody had asked him about Trinidad. And he said, now this is Trinidad going into the Hopkins fight in 2001. He said, in his opinion, Trinidad could have been champ and fought in any era as a middleweight, which kind of took me by surprise a little bit. So then what happens? A couple weeks later, Hopkins dismantles Trinidad. So if we're going to talk about Hopkins, if you're going to give me the best Hopkins and the best LaMotta, a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but I think Hopkins could take his punch. I think he's better conditioned. I think he has a higher IQ, and I think he would do just enough to stink the place out and keep LaMotta from getting going. And I think Hopkins would probably win a controversial decision. Yeah, I can't argue with that. I mean, Hopkins, keep in mind, he was a whiner. He'd constantly be complaining. He would fake injuries during the fight. You could get to him mentally. As much as you think Hopkins got to his opponents mentally, they got to him mentally just as much. And LaMotta's a tough night's work, but you'd think Hopkins could maybe do just enough, to get by in a fight like that. I'll tell you this. One great middleweight who I think LaMotta would have beaten that came after him, Nino Benvenuti. I think he could have roughed Benvenuti up.
I don't think there's any doubt about that, Jack.
Well, there's doubt.
No doubt about that. Benvenuti is not going to beat LaMotta. All right, there's one. Gigi versus LaMotta. Joe Bergman, that's a tough one.
Triple G at his very best. I wouldn't bet against him in that fight because Triple G had such a great offensive attack. The way he would throw punches, put it together, and he would meet LaMotta mostly head-on, box him somewhat, unless you feel LaMotta can run Triple G out of the ring. Okay.
No, I don't think he can run him out of the ring, but I know if Canelo can hang with Triple G for 24 rounds, Jake LaMotta could, and he would actually put more heat on him than Canelo could. So that's a tough matchup. You know what? I'm going to say this, Joe. I'm going to go with LaMotta for one reason. I just think he's been in with better people, and I would just have more confidence in him holding up. But you know what? Gigi's probably a little bit better technician. Neither guy knocks the other guy out. That fight might come down to who's in better shape that night.
LaMotta against Emil Griffith. Emil was one of my idols. But I have to.
LaMotta's too big.
At middleweight, well, Griffith is used to, big guys, but Griffith was so physically strong.
Oh, he's one of my favorites. He's on my top.
Right, but the strength factor wouldn't have come in, but I kind of feel it's the type of fight that if they fought 5 times, LaMotta wins 3, Griffith 2, maybe 4-2, best 4 out of 7. That would have been a heck of a fight, but Gene Foreman,
I like LaMotta there just because I just think, again, he forced Emil back. Emil didn't like to back up, and I think that would be the difference. But Emil is in there with anybody. I mean, he gave Monzon 2 tough fights, so that says it all.
Gene Fulma against LaMotta. Carmen Basilio.
Oh, that would be a good one, too.
Fulma and Basilio with LaMotta. I mean, talk about exciting fights.
I don't think Carmen's big enough, Frank, but I think Fulmer is.
Frank, in the few minutes that we have, I want to ask you a question. What's all this terminology I'm hearing lately? I want you to educate me, Frank. You have to educate me on this. I don't understand. I need you to help me, Frank. What is a check left hook? Please tell me.
It's a punch that when you see the guy there, you check to see if he's there, and then you throw the hook.
Oh, you mean you're checking and you're analyzing it before you throw the hook? Let
me tell you something, Jack. You know what it is? It's a cute name for a counter hook. That's what it is. And we live in an era where guys at this time, analysts and even ex-fighters get caught up in it. They want to reinvent the language to sound all-knowing. I'm sorry. There are only 4 punches: a jab, a right hand, a hook, and an uppercut. Frank, there are variations of them, but there are only 4 punches.
Frank, it's bad enough that all these young people are coming up with all this technology that I have a hard time keeping up with, but boxing was my one thing. Now, what is this? A swivel uppercut or something? A
swivel jab. Another fugazi.
What is a swivel jab?
I don't know. It all depends on who's announcing the fight. Lee says it's a pullback counter hook. So basically, Lee, it's a counter hook, or you slip and you hook. Do we have to call it a check hook? What does check mean exactly? Am I checking the guy before he throws it? Am I checking to see if he's there? It's a phony punch. And you know what? They're just reinventing the language, Jack. You know what? Maybe it's a younger thing, but I'm sorry. There are 4 punches. And that's it. And there's no other punches. Look, Razor Ruddock had the smash. Is that really a punch? It was a hybrid uppercut.
Well, he wanted the net.
Keith Gavilan had the bolo punch. What's that? It's nothing but an uppercut. Ali said he knocked Liston out with the anchor punch. Yeah. What's an anchor punch? He never threw it again. It's a chopping right hand.
The first fight in history who had a punch named after him was Kid McCoy, the corkscrew punch.
Another one. There's 4 punches. There's variations of them.
Sorry. Bob Fitzsimmons, the solar plexus punch.
Right.
Got Jim Corbett to win the heavyweight title.
Right. That's a punch. It's a punch. Is it a right hand or a left hand? It's whatever he throws to do it. I think it was his right hand, but we know with that, they all have these fancy names for these punches. I don't enjoy that, and it really bothers me when I hear a guy like Timothy Bradley and even Andre Ward talk about, he threw that check hook or the swivel jab. Get out of here. Come on. Is that the up jab? Are you turning and shifting your body? It's just gotten out of hand, and you know what, Jack? We'll be gone in 20 years, and by then, they'll have new punches. But until I fight somebody with 3 arms, there are only 4 punches.
Okay, Frank, lively discussion. I love talking boxing with you. Love to hear the viewpoints of our listeners out there. And I can't wait to talk to you next week because we're going to have a lot more clarity with what's going on in the sport of boxing, with the fights taking place on the weekend.
Porter loses, but he gives Crawford a good scare a few times.
Have a good week, Frank.
You too, Jack.